this accelerating force, you now can compare two things. You can compare the force pulling down and pushing in all directions from the pressure generated by compacting water molecules together. And you can say, okay, well, we have a force pushing in the opposite direction of F. And then you can say when the water as an object is being pulled down by gravity, including the air inside of the object, it becomes, has a less density, and you end up getting you reach buoyancy when the weight of the water that is being displaced by the volume is equal to the volume of the object that you're making buoyant. So
120.
Yeah, I got it. And then the third one is, and we'll cover this one if we get to it. I'd like to bring up 2 European Galilean satellites that were recently launched into I guess it would be geocentric orbit, where it's the European version of the GPS, where they mistakenly put a satellite into a wrong orbit. The eccentricity of the satellite's orbit makes it more elliptical than circular. It becomes so elliptical that you can actually test the effects of gravity on the acceleration of time, or the movement of time on the atomic clock. So for some reason, when the clocks are closer to Earth, they tick at a slower rate, which is predicted by Einstein's general relativity, which general relativity is the theory behind the observational gravitational attraction. So these satellites are they match up completely with what our...
Did we lose you?
I don't know what happened.
We might have lost him.
That would be the end of time, anyway. But
okay, he finally caught up.
Right as I dropped out. So, but yeah, you're good. You got pretty much everything I said.
All right.
Ross,
it's back to you. You're going to be providing positive evidence of the reason why you believe what you believe for the next 10 minutes. So if you want to get that 10-minute counter ready. So whenever you're ready, Ross.
Okay then. Yeah, well, I'm good to go. I probably would prefer it if we could address these things maybe one-on-one rather than in great big chunks of the time, because I've not got nothing to take notes with at the moment, and I do have sort of short-term memory loss problems at times.
Well, let me pause there and toss an idea at you. Go ahead and pause or stop the timer. Go ahead and I'm going to give you a chance to restart the timer on this. Are you on a computer or a cell phone?
I'm on a laptop computer. Yeah.
Is there any way you can open up a notepad and take notes on that? I'm just offering a suggestion to.
Hey Ross, when we get to my 10 minutes, in fact, if you're willing to just cut out the 10-minute altogether, I've already submitted my 3 points. I already know where you're going to come with your 1 point. So why don't we just start the conversation with right there, from moving forward, talking about gravity from the density buoyancy perspective. And then when I have a point to bring up, you can address my point as well. Would you be okay with that? I know this is last minute and you're not prepared, and I don't want to put you in a position. I am completely prepared. So I don't want to, put you in a position to where you're automatically in a disadvantage because I have 10 minutes to submit my facts.
Yeah, no, I'd appreciate that, actually. I think addressing things one at a time is a far better way to go. That way we can sort of stay on the topic as much as possible. So I would appreciate that. I mean, I still could say something just briefly that I think would be worth it to do. That is the fact that in the heliocentric model, we're talking about multiple speeds. We've got like this crazy spin of 1,000 miles per hour. We've got the orbital rate of 66,600 miles per hour around the sun. And they say that the sun is also going through the galaxy at 514,000 miles per hour. So for anything like a satellite to be orbiting around this Earth, according to this free fall gravity motion thing, it's actually not free fall motion. It has to be speeding up and slowing down the whole time. Like every time it's behind us, it needs to accelerate to get back in front of us on just this orbital rate alone. So gravity cannot explain this. Gravity says the attraction of a mass is what attracts something and keeps it in orbit, but it doesn't explain a free fall object, for example, the moon, nobody's been able to answer this one yet, and still say why it is repelled from us and attracted towards us at about more or less constant distance the whole time. So if gravity can address this for the moon or any other satellite object, I think that's a really good place to start. And I think we should also at the same time mention
can I address that? Can I address that since you
yeah, okay.
Rob, would you mind if I address would you mind if I address the moon orbit? Because this is a common misconception a lot of people have, is that the moon is orbiting the Earth, which is not correct. The moon is orbiting the sun, and the Earth is influencing that orbit. Okay, so when we look at it as if the moon is going around us, but if the Earth disappeared, the moon wouldn't just fly off into space. It would continue to orbit the sun just like it's orbiting now, except for it wouldn't have its epicycle. It wouldn't actually be pulled when, let's say, when the moon is on the other side of the Earth, for instance, it has it's now being pulled by two objects, the sun and the moon. So then it begins accelerating towards the sun faster than it normally would, which brings it around to the other side of the Earth. So there is an explanation that is completely congruent with the definition of what gravity does.
But we are told that it takes 27.5 days basically to go around the Earth backwards once.
Well, that's from our perspective. Yes, sir. That's from our perspective.
Yeah. Which means that it's obviously then a real phenomenon. You know, only on the stationary planar Earth does it make sense that it goes around us once every day, and it takes 50 minutes longer each day. And that's a good logical explanation for why we have a moon at a more or less constant distance. But for it to be able to go up with the phenomenal speeds of the Earth, plus go its own phenomenal speeds to go around us, plus our speeds around the sun, it's
right.
It's a big stretch to say in free fall speed.
Well, yeah, that's what I was saying. So if you look at it from the moon's perspective, orbiting the sun, it still takes 365 days, 365.24 days to go completely around the sun and get back to the same orbital position that it was in with the Earth. So they're both moving around the sun. Now, here's the thing. It picks up speed a little bit due to the additional acceleration from the Earth that the Earth provides. So as it's going, when it's crossing, let's say, the backside of the Earth and beginning on its 27-day or 27.3 days, I think it is, 27.3-day orbit around the Earth, as it's crossing the backside of that, it begins picking up speed relative to the sun, but not relative to the Earth. To the Earth, it still keeps its natural path because we're looking at it from a relative position. It's kind of like watching a fly fly in your car. From someone standing outside of your car watching the fly, he doesn't see the fly flying back and forth in the car. He sees it flying across, driving a long distance. So if you look at it from the sun's perspective, the moon seems to pick up a little bit of speed, but it gets that speed from the acceleration of the gravitational pull of the Earth. Then when it comes back around, it appears to slow down to the sun. But that's only from the sun's perspective. From the perspective of Earth, it appears to just make a natural circle around us.
It's all a little bit convenient, though, wouldn't you say, that some sort of freak chance of nature could do this and also have it also appear to be pretty much the exact same size as the sun whenever it eclipses it. I mean, this is all just a little far too convenient to be random chance accidents, as far as I'm concerned, but I'll accept your answer. So let's move on to the next thing, if you like.
Okay. Now, I would like to bring up the point, since you did speak on buoyancy. I would like you to try to explain the observation of ice becoming semi-submerged. Because ice becoming semi-submerged is an actual, we can calculate why it does this. And in fact, since there is no such thing as the gravitational force pulling on something that does not exist, anything that exists, even if it was a singular atom, would actually be pulled down, disregarding the force, the surface tension, let's say. Anything that sits onto the surface of any water is going to have some kind of force effect that's going to pull it down a little bit. This is just basic physics right here. So explain that phenomenon to the best way that you can with your worldview as far as gravity goes.
Okay, well, everything, as I said, it sort of depends upon the medium within which it's in. Now, ice is actually just another form of water, but because when it's frozen, it does expand slightly. So that's what makes it slightly more buoyant in water than the rest of the water. Now, why it would rest on top of the water when it's not of sufficient air density, it's still quite heavy. It's still basically the same thing as water. It's just slightly more expanded. So that's why it will sink in the water, because it basically is water, and it will float just under the surface, or sometimes just above in the case of an iceberg because of its shape, with the majority of it underwater. It does so just simply because of its particular density in relationship to the water.
Okay, let me change.
Filled with air, the whole thing will float on the surface. But then if the ball gets filled half full of water, it will be half submerged underwater. If it's completely filled with water, it sinks in the water and will probably keep on sinking, depending on how dense the rubber be made of is. So.
Let's change this up a little bit, and let's say it's a rubber ball. Okay, let's say it's a solid rubber ball that has air on the inside of it. So the rubber is more dense than the water. Okay, so when you set it in there, why does the ball not sink to the bottom? Why would it float? Number one, and number two, why would it be semi-submerged? Why would it not just float on top, since the ball is with the air inside is less dense than the water as a whole?
Well, as you described, the density of the ball itself is some amount of density, so that's what displaces some amount of the water. But because an air bubble, for example, the ball is basically an air bubble. It's just made with a solid barrier. So because bubbles will rise in the water by themselves, uncontained even, the fact this one is contained, the air is probably under some amount of pressure, so it's slightly more dense than normal air pressure would be anyway. The ball itself and that would...
Can I ask you to define pressure for me, please? Can I ask you to define pressure for me, please? Or what you think pressure is?
Within a sealed environment, you can put more and more air into it, say like into a tire or into your ball, and that makes the outside surface much tighter and harder. If you lower the pressure, the outside surface becomes softer. So it's pretty much just the amount of air that you can enclosed environment that is sealed.
Pressure is force per unit air, or per unit area. So pounds per square inch, kilograms per square centimeter. That's what pressure is. So what is the force that's providing the pressure for the buoyant force, for the water to, you know what I'm saying, for the ball to sink a little bit? You say it's slightly displacing some water. Right, so there's and then you started to explain it as the pressure that's from the air inside pushing up and from the ball pushing down. How are you explaining this pressure without a force?
Well, what you've described is just a measurement of the pressure. It doesn't really take away from what it is. It's just a way of then being able to say how much of it is. So I think that's the trouble with
that's our way of quantifying it. That's our
using the phenomenon with the way of measuring it, and the phenomenon is really what we're discussing. The amount, give or take. Yes, you can measure it pounds per square inch, or however you want to measure it. That's entirely unrelated to the phenomenon that the pressure actually does exist. So
here's my problem. Here's my problem with your explanation. Right, my problem with your explanation is that you think that air is just pushing upwards, because for some reason flat earthers don't believe air is also coming down. Okay, so if you have a rubber ball that's completely closed off with the air inside, that what you have is the air wanting to go down, the rubber ball wanting to go down, and the rubber ball is more dense than the water. So what is keeping the rubber ball from going straight to the bottom, regardless of the air inside, without being able to say there's something pulling heavier on the water than on the air? Why is the air even significant?
Because that's the nature of density and buoyancy, is that air has its level, water has its level. And that's why you don't have unenclosed air and water.
I'm not sure you...
Hold on.
I'm not sure you understand what I'm saying. Okay, yeah, Ross, go ahead. My bad. Go ahead, Ross.
Air being more buoyant than the water, of course, it always wants to rise to the water's surface. the only slight amount of pull is the density of the ball itself, which is displacing a small amount of water. But because it's filled with air, that is why it's floating. I've sort of explained that already, that if you remove the air and replace it with water, then it goes down.